Hi everyone, can you hear me? Just checking. Good. Okay, great. Hello, I'm Ruby and I'm in my final year studying English literature. This presentation is based on my dissertation research, which has been about Black women's place within the Rock Against Racism movement. So just to jump straight in, why was Rock Against Racism founded? So this man on the left is Enoch Powell, who was a member of parliament who emblemised racism during the 1960s. Enoch gave his infamous Rivers of Blood speech on the 20th of April in 1968, and on the side there's a quote from the speech. The speech strongly criticised mass immigration, especially Commonwealth immigration to the United Kingdom and the proposed race relations bill. The National Front was a far-right fascist political party, which during the mid-1970s was briefly the UK's fourth largest party in terms of vote share. The National Front believed in the ethnic nationalist view that only white people should be citizens of the United Kingdom. The Battle of Lewisham took place on the 13th of August 1977, when 500 members of the far-right National Front attempted to march from New Cross to Lewisham in London, and various counter-demonstrations by approximately 4,000 people led to violent clashes between the two groups and the police. So, how does the emboldened racist rhetoric of the 1970s relate to music? Almost 10 years after Powell's speech, during a performance on the 5th of August 1976, blues and rock musician Eric Clapton, who's pictured on the slide, voiced his support of Enoch Powell and announced on stage that "I think Enoch's right, I think we should send them all back, stop Britain from becoming a black colony, get the foreigners out and keep Britain white." The founders of Rock Against Racism strongly criticised the hypocrisy of musicians such as Eric Clapton, who expressed racist sentiments yet played music genres created by black people. They called for people to help form a movement called Rock Against Racism and received hundreds of eager replies from fans who recognised the hypocrisy and wanted to proclaim the black roots of the music they loved. So Rock Against Racism was founded in 1976, bringing together black and white fans in their common love of music. The first Rock Against Racism gig took place at the Prince Alice pub in London in November 1976. At the end of the gig, the band took part in a jam, something which was to become a signature of Rock Against Racism gigs at the time, when it was still rare for black and white musicians to perform together. By 1977, local Rock Against Racism groups were springing up all over the country, and there were more than eventually there were more than 200 throughout the UK. With support for the movement growing, in 1978, Rock Against Racism organised a national carnival in London in conjunction with the Anti-Nazi League to counteract the rising number of racist attacks in the UK. On the 30th of April 1978, 100,000 people marched 6 miles from Trafalgar Square to the East End of London, a National Front hotspot, for an open-air concert at Victoria Park in Hackney. Temporary Hoarding fanzine was launched by Rock Against Racism in 1976, going on to produce 15 issues over the next 5 years. As part of my dissertation research, I went to the British Library to access the zine, and the next few slides show some of the pictures that I took at the British Library. So here you can see Black and White Unite and Fight, which was the slogan of Rock Against Racism. And you can see temporary hoarding was deeply inspired by the punk and do-it-yourself ethoses. So a lot of the images are quite all over the place, but very vivid, very in your face. Yeah, these are some of my favourites that I put up on screen. And you can see a reference to the Battle of Lewisham here. So very politically engaged. Yeah, some of my favourites. And here, one of the best things about Rock Against Racism was its localism, and lots of the issues of temporary hoarding were related to areas such as Leeds. Those familiar with Leeds history might be able to recognise this picture of this man, David Olawale, who was a British Nigerian drowned in the River Aire in Leeds in 1969 by the West Yorkshire Police. So you can see that Rock Against Racism really did try and relate to certain local areas and relate to the fans there. And you can't really read it on the right, but there's a reference to the Fenton, the pub in Leeds, which was a Rock Against Racism venue and was actually attacked by the National Front because of its ties with Rock Against Racism. So yeah. Okay, on to Black women and Rock Against Racism. Polystyrene. Born Marianne Joan Elliott Said, Polystyrene was the front woman of the punk rock band X-Ray Specs. Styrene had an English mother and Somali father, and aged 15 ran away from home with £3 in her pocket and hitchhiked from one music festival to another. After seeing a Sex Pistols performance in 1976, aged 19, she decided to form the punk band X-Ray Specs, who launched their debut single in 1977. She was described by Billboard as the archetype of the modern-day feminist punk because she wore dental braces, stood against the typical sex object female of the 1970s rock star, sported a gaudy day-glow wardrobe, and was mixed race. Yeah, you can see pictures of Polystyrene here, and here she is with X-ray specs. So you can see she wasn't really a typical punk front woman, and she also performed at the carnival that Rock Against Racism held in London. Okay, and here are some images of an interview that was in temporary hoarding with Rock Against Racism and Polystyrene. Okay. Pauline Black came to prominence in the late 1970s as the lead singer of the two-tone band The Selector. Black, who had an Anglo-Jewish mother and Nigerian father, was adopted by a white middle-aged couple and given the name Pauline Vickers. Black was a founding member of The Selector, who were formed in Coventry in 1979. The Selector, along with the Specials and Madness, were credited with starting the ska revival two-tone movement. The Selector featured a diverse lineup, both in terms of race and gender. The band were one of the most successful ska bands of the two-tone era, notching up several top 40 singles in the British charts. Black translated the popular rude boy aesthetic, featuring sharp suits, thin ties, and pork pie or trilby hats, into a rude girl aesthetic with her androgynous style. Two-tone was a product of punk and reggae, and unlike punk, which often had racist undertones, with musicians such as Sid Vicious using Nazi imagery and criticisms of reggae as being sexist, two-tone songs were often strongly political and advocated for working class solidarity. However, racists still came to two-tone gigs. Their music was especially popular again amongst skinheads and mod revivalists who would come to performances to start fights or make monkey noises at black band members. The genre also only made a surface level attempt to combat sexism within the wider music scene, which can be seen in the founding of Rock Against Sexism movement by Lucy Toothpaste, who was involved in Rock Against Racism, but felt that the movement wasn't doing enough to challenge the sexism within the movement. Okay. So other criticisms of Rock Against Racism are that all the fans of the movement were white and the audiences were predominantly white. They invited bands with National Front fan bases to Rock Against Racism events, such as Sham 69, who are pictured here, endangering black audience members when the fans inevitably started fights. The founders have argued that the audiences were predominantly white because it was the white audience's minds they were trying to change. If all of the audiences had been black, then they wouldn't have actually been able to challenge racism. Okay. My final slide is a poem called Rock Against Racism by Khadija Ibrahim, who is a Leeds-based poet, and she attended a Rock Against Racism carnival in Leeds in 1981, and she wrote a poem about her experiences. I'm not sure if I have time to read it out, but you can all read it on the slide here, because I think I've gone a bit over time. But yeah, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.